Hello and welcome to another episode of Literary Liberation Podcast. Today we will be discussing, analyzing, and reviewing The Will of the Many by James Islington. Kristen and I have adopted a Palestinian family that is currently still stuck in Gaza. Mohammed's neighborhood was bombed and killed 22 members of his family, leaving him responsible for his 4 younger siblings who were pulled from the rubble. We have their family's GoFundMe linked in the description, and they are very close to their goal. Please donate below. Don't forget there is a link below to sign up for our free newsletter where you can get more information updates about us and the podcast. For more content outside of the podcast, please check out our Instagram and TikTok at Literary Liberation and Twitter at LitLibPodcast. I'm your co-host, Mariah, and you can find me at Hungry Rye on all social media platforms.
And I'm your co-host, Kristen. You can find me at KRXXCXN on all social media platforms.
Well, good thing we got all the boring shit out of the way. Now we can really tear into this fucker.
Boring shit. What?
Our intro.
Oh.
It's like our nice little rehearse bit where we say it, sounds all nice and polished, and then we can get into
Okay.
the sauce.
So, for those of you who listen to us regularly or have listened to us before, I feel like this could be our level of discussion will be similar to Babel's in the way that this is probably one of the most politically intriguing books that we have read this year on the podcast.
Yeah, I think Uprising is probably the close second.
But I think this is
Just
so much
because it's a
more.
historical fiction.
Yeah.
But yeah, this one we're gonna talk about a lot more. So I think even if you don't read the book, you'll probably get something out of it.
At least the beginning
But
half, because we'll try to talk a little bit before we spoil halfway through, because this book is kind of a monster, and it's only the first in the series, which the rest of the series has not been released yet, which me and Mariah, I will say as of now, we are planning to read the second installment and possibly doing another episode on it.
yeah, this book I was reading through reviews. I can't remember where I saw it, but apparently it has about I think 30,000 more words than the Priory of the Orange Tree. So
Really?
even though it's
Wow.
less pages, it has more word count. Like, it is a very dense book. It's not for the faint of heart, in my opinion. I think you have to really like fantasy to
Yeah.
read this at
Mhm.
a bare minimum. And I'm very surprised with how many people have, I guess, because fantasy, like the community, like it just seems like everyone reads the same books. Like, I don't feel like it's all that divisive. Like when everyone's reading like The Will of the Many or Brandon Sanderson or Robin Hobb, like people just do it. Like it's like a huge
Yeah.
community and everyone's reading the same shit. So like there's a ton of people, and the fact that so many different book talkers have been, or booktubers as well, have talked about this book in particular, it's starting to cross a lot of different like genre boundaries in social media. So we thought it would be a good opportunity to discuss it.
Yeah, I mean, because it is one of the most popular books that it's actually one of the newer books too that I feel like we're reading, because I feel like, at least like in the book talk sphere, a lot of the times books kind of have to like be out for a little bit before they pop off. But like this book came out in 2023, so last year, and it's already at almost 70,000 reviews on Goodreads alone. So I think that's a significant portion of people reading it, and the average rating is a 4.62 star rating, so it's very highly rated out of 70,000 reviews. That
Yeah,
like,
the majority of people is like 5-star and 4-star.
yeah, like, it's literally, like, you look at the bar graph for the Goodreads, and it's literally, like, 5 stars, like, the biggest bar, which I feel like is very rare, especially on Book Talk, because I feel like a lot of the times Book Talk is very divisive, but I guess maybe fantasy isn't very divisive.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like at least with, I
At
don't
least
know,
what
if
we
it's
read.
high fantasy or like the stuff that we're consuming, there's not a lot of like niche fantasy because like these are often series. They're very seldom standalone novels that we
Mhm.
find. It's like the George R. Martin, it's Tolkien, it's these like very cherished and, as you called it, like a book talk darling. Like people
Yeah.
love these types of books. Like once you read it, like people lock in. Which I can like understand to an extent. Usually like the world building and whatnot. It's just different than contemporary fiction, I guess.
I mean, I
I
know
mean, yeah.
me personally, I typically prefer series too in general and longer books because I like spending time with the characters that I love and getting to know them more and more versus like whenever you read like a standalone or a single book, then it's like you only have like limited 500 pages. While like if you're reading like a big fantasy series, you have thousands and thousands of pages within
Yes,
them.
I also do think that with fantasy novels, there is often political intrigue
Yes.
that's generally like the vehicle moving the plot along. So I think people who read fantasy may like political content. And then if that's the case, you'll probably like this podcast. Hi, hello, welcome. I'm scared. I feel like a lot of new people are going to end up watching this just because of how big it is, and I don't feel like there's any Marxist or proper left wing people. When I say proper left wing, I mean like anti
Communist.
capitalist people who actually read, yes, uh, who actually read like Marxist
Fiction
theory. We're
and
reading,
fiction. Because
yeah,
I think a lot of
no,
the time,
like we're reading nonfiction and we're applying
yes,
our
nonfiction readings.
ideology and our lens to the fiction books, so it's a little bit different.
But I think
Yeah.
the problem is that people, I feel like a lot of the times there's not a lot of crossover like within it. It's like people either read nonfiction only or they read fiction only. Very rarely do people mix it in, I think. Like if they do mix it in, it's like not as often, you know?
hmm So here we are. We're gonna do it. There's
Anyways.
not a whole lot to go off of with the author because this is not his debut novel, but it is, I think, his most popular series. He's Australian. Not a whole lot about him. We can't find any politics, any like he's very quiet about what he does. I did see that he was inspired by Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series, and also Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, which I
I
hadn't
don't
heard about. But
know
we'll
who
talk
that is.
about the latter one. We were doing like the criticisms and like the Goodreads reviews or whatever.
Mhm.
Not, but yeah, there's not a whole lot about him. So as of right now, he hasn't come out as a Zionist. He also hasn't said anything to counter that claim. So we're in a little bit of a gray area.
Mhm.
Apologies for that. Things are subject to change. It is December 2024 currently. So if anything's changed, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, because, like, again, whenever me and Mariah do these researches of these authors, I mean, typically it's not like we're scrolling every single social media post, but we are, like, Googling their name and, like, Googling, like, controversies that could pop up and, like, general, like, word
Advanced search on
buzzwords. Yeah,
Twitter.
Twitter. Yeah, we'll, like, go
Usually I
through
feel
their
like Twitter
Twitter
is
and,
like the litmus test.
yeah, like, we'll go on their Twitter and, like, type in certain words, like, just like politics, voting, and stuff like that. And then also he is from Australia too. And so I know me and Mariah are not very well versed in like the intricacies of the Australian politics or government there either. So if there's like anything of like this book that can reference that more, we would probably love if anybody has like any nonfiction recommendations or articles or anything like about like more in depth about like the Australian policies if they relate to like how this book is presented and written. But I know like as we were reading it, we can see the similarities at least to the US government.
Yeah, I feel like their government functions similarly to Britain's,
England?
mainly because they were originally like yeah, the UK's
Yeah.
system.
With like
It
the
just seems to be
parliament.
that case. I think they just have different names for their parties, which would make sense. But I don't want to go on any too. What am I saying? I don't want to go on a limb and like suggest something that I don't know. We're gonna try to keep it pretty grounded in what we do know.
Yeah, so
We can go over our personal thoughts, or if you have anything else to say, there's not a whole lot
well,
else
I
in the
guess
Notion, our little organization for this
well,
episode.
I feel like we should possibly give a summary if you are one of those rare people that have not heard of the Will of the Many or read anything about it, and you're just like a casual listener of the podcast. Um, I think what me and Mariah definitely want more of is more left-wing people to read and review this, like friends of ours and like people that are within our community, because we can have a much broader discussion because within this we're very limited because I think all of the people that are reading it are not like super like communists necessarily because I feel like at least of all the reviews that I've seen, none of like our mutuals have read or reviewed this versus Babel they had read and reviewed,
Yeah.
which is
And I think we have a lot
interesting.
of yeah, I don't know where the discount. I don't know if it's just because it's newer and it hasn't gotten
Yeah.
vetted, and we just haven't brought it. Maybe we're going to be the ones bringing it to the attention of people. I don't know. We're gonna find out.
Um
Um,
but the basic summary is you basically I don't want to say too much cuz I mean, you don't want to go in as blind as possible because Mariah did go in as blind as possible and it really um
it
I
made
don't
it
know.
difficult to get through the first bit until I fixed the way I was thinking. I thought it was the way it was pitched on Book Talk. I thought it was a historical Roman fantasy. It's
Which
not. It
it is
is
not.
Roman inspired.
It,
Like
it is
Golden Age Roman inspired,
yeah.
but it is also more I think it's more sci-fi. It reads a lot more like a dystopian book. I
I
don't
can
think
see
it's
that.
very fantasy, but there is some fantastical elements to it and like there is a magic system even though it is a lot more scientific, so it doesn't feel like a fantasy book sometimes. It feels a little bit more methodical, but that's
Yeah.
just my 2 cents on that. Like it's a very interesting setup,
But
like
you
the
basically
world building of this.
yeah. Well, you basically just to like give like a basic summary, like if you don't know anything about it, it basically is a it's a tome, by the way. It's like 700 pages, so like if you're reading this, you got to be aware of that. But it is following Viz is our main character who is an orphan who basically gets adopted by a powerful man and he has to go to this academy to kind of solve a murder, but then also like this academy and like the man that adopted him work for like the government that basically colonized the country that he was originally from and is responsible for the death of his entire family.
Yeah, I feel like if you are somebody who has read Throne of Glass, it's kind of similar to that character tropes.
Mm,
But
I don't know.
Chris and I will get into like the nuances. It's kind
Yeah.
of there's some similarities if you I so the thing is like Kristen is going to tell you to read this book and I'm going to tell you maybe don't. But that's just my
But you
that's
just said
just
you
where
want more
I'm at.
communists to read it, so
I am not saying it as an enjoyable like read it
I
because I think it's so great. I need other people to read it for the politics of it to see if I am reading too far into it.
I think if you like dark academia, I think you can really be interested in this. If you like very complex world building and like it is a very I think it's a very like expansive world. Like I think James Ilsington put a lot of work into this story where I personally very much enjoyed it where even if I think I don't know if this is where me and Mariah disagree, where I don't need a book to 100% like have my values to find it an enjoyable read, you know, because I would not argue that this book is like communist in any way or either of like the groups within it are like communist or like liberators really in any way, but I do think it is a very enjoyable read, especially if you are somebody that likes like Game of Thrones, the television show, and like that sort of like politics in your book, where it like kind of gets you thinking a little bit different than what you would normally, I think, be drawn to.
I I rated it right now it's sitting on like a 3 star. Although that is like subject to change and I don't know which direction that would go in if I can be sold on anything else. It just the political intrigue because it is like such a prevalent aspect to this book. I wasn't happy with the way that they were built. I didn't like the economic status of the main character. I didn't really like the main character. I didn't like the pacing. I have a lot of like contentions with this book and the way that the revolutionaries specifically are portrayed. So I'm kind of just unsure of where it's gonna. I don't want to hold it to a standard of what it's not, but just based on what I do know at this point in time, I don't like the politics of it. And we'll get into it in the spoilers because
Yes.
I came with receipts because I know a lot of people love this. I promise you, this is not unfounded. I have lines from Kristen can see. I have a document.
Yes.
It's a hearty document with
Um,
lots of lines, and we're gonna get into it. So I don't want people to think because I don't want to be cannibalized for saying the things I'm
well,
gonna
because
say.
Mariah's opinion is very unpopular, and I don't even think that necessarily, like, if you are, like, a communist or left wing, that you will dislike this book because of how certain things are portrayed or said and stuff like that, where I do think and that's I think because we live in, like, a capitalistic society, and I do think, like, we could go more into, like, the outside impacts on why, like, this falls into certain tropes that we can go into more whenever we get into the spoiler zone, but I do think that, like, because we live in, like, a neoliberal world, that that is, like, inherent biases that people will have, and most people do have, objectively. We know this, you know?
Yes, I think I'm ready to segue. I'm ready to take the plunge
I don't know if there's anything well,
whenever.
because, like, I don't know if we can talk about, like, the criticisms. I don't know if you have any criticisms that other people had with it
I looked
without
at the. I do have criticisms that I saved. Most of the positives were about the same. So this is going to be like a semi spoilery, like maybe not specific plot points, but like you're going to get more. I don't know. Maybe Kristen can determine whether or not these are spoilers. But I did go through some of the criticisms that I thought were founded. It's from people that actually read it, not just the DNFers, because I don't think that's fair.
Yeah, I hate when
For
people
this,
are like,
because
"This
I
book sucks." Yeah.
struggled through it. So if they're like, I read 100 pages, I was like, listen, I get it. A lot of people did stop around 145 pages because they thought it was slow and boring, and I can absolutely agree. If I was not reading this for the podcast, I would not have finished it.
But also, I
Excuse
just
me.
want these people to know, anybody that's here, that's listening to this, Mariah also DNF Priory of the Orange Tree. So I want you to look at that and think about that. Because Mariah thought Priory of the Orange Tree was too slow as well.
It was a very slow. I would possibly
Just
go back through. Like if we were dead set on filming it, I would struggle through it. But that is not like I love The Lord of the Rings. I love a good fantasy novel, high fantasy. I love Between Two Fires, like high fantasy, dark medieval fantasy. But this, I have my reasons. I promise, but I just can't get into it without talking about the spoilers. So I think the first thing I want to talk about is his inspiration, which is that book, right? The
Mistborn?
second one. No, the
Oh.
something of the wind.
Oh, I don't know anything about that book, so I can't really
I wanted to
the
look because I know what Mistborn is about. It's like
Name of the Wind.
a heist book, The Name of the Wind. But I went into it, and the way it's described, right, is like it is the intimate narrative of his childhood and a trope of traveling players. His years spent as a near feral orphan in a crime-ridden city. Um, he goes to a legend. This main character in this book goes to a legendary school of magic, and his life as a fugitive after the murder of a king form of gripping. I think it was like a king of a country. Um, but that's like basically what it is. It's like an orphan.
Which, like
There's a lot of parallels between the characters because I think the orphan is also of like a bourgeois. Like this is
but the thing
it's
is
like Anastasia type.
but this is, like, a popular character trope where I don't necessarily think if you don't like that character trope, you don't like that character trope. You know what I'm saying?
Which I think that was already an issue. Had I known that, that probably would have been like, I don't know, because that's not my character
But
trope.
it literally, even though it explains that in the description of the book, which I tried to explain to Mariah, and Mariah was like, "Don't tell me anything, I don't want any spoilers." I'm like, "This isn't even a
The
spoiler."
people that get it. Like the ones that are like, I gotta go in blind so I like can immerse myself completely. But this is not one of those ones. I should have done that. Anyways, so I did end up going back through and reading it. I was like, okay, this because they started feeling like Throne of Glass, like Elaine Galifianakis when she's Selena. Sorry, spoilers.
Spoiler.
Don't read it. She's a shame as a Zionist, anyways. If you haven't heard it by now, you probably are gonna hear it. It's just like the almost the exact same character trope.
But I think this is a like it's also a common character trope. Like, it's not like reinventing the wheel, and I don't think The Will of the Many is reinventing the wheel in any way because like you always have like the noble child that was orphaned by like whatever circumstances that have happened because like you have it in Harry Potter, you have it in like even like the series of unfortunate events. Like children of wealthy people being orphaned is like a normal like plot point. Like it's a general
But
thing.
it's not them being orphaned. It's
It's
them being orphaned and then being brought back up into power. That's I like a working class, like a poverty focused book. Like that's my preference.
Mariah wants you
Is
to be
like
born
people, common
poor.
folk. Yes, yeah, I like to see my people in my books.
I mean, like, yes, I can understand that, but I also think like objectively, if he was just working class, he would not be the main character of this book. It would not have worked for the story. And you know it wouldn't.
For this story, I think they could have just reworked it. I think they could have focused on any other character. But that's my whole thing. I do not like Viz as a character.
But
That's besides the point. Anyways, I just thought that was an interesting parallel comparing it to that. I just need to know when we can get into
I mean, if
the
you're ready to get into spoilers or if you want to give your criticisms that you think are not spoilery,
I feel like I already did. I think
okay.
I did.
Well,
I think I'm done.
We can
I
move on
don't
to the
necessarily
spoiler
recommend
zone.
it. It's kind of like 50-50. Like if you want to embark on this is like your type of book, you might like it. If you were somebody that reads a lot more, I just wrote my like little Goodreads review. I was like, but I think if you're somebody that reads a lot more like revolutionary nonfiction books, I think you may have a hard time if these are not like your character tropes that you have just become accustomed to or you really enjoy reading. I don't necessarily know that you will enjoy this.
I
It's like
do
up in the
think
air. I think it's like a 3-star read. I think it's a solid 3-star for me, personally.
I gave it 5 stars, which I don't know if I've said, because I gobbled this book up. I read it so fast. I mean, I started reading it before Mariah, but I also like again, this is another like I talked about in the notes on the execution video. I intentionally slowed myself down because we had to push back filming for Mariah to finish the book. So I intentionally began slowing myself down towards the end so that I wouldn't finish it because again, I like to be very fresh from my read whenever we do the podcast episodes. I think it was very complex. I do again don't want to spoil it because I know I'm gonna have to be on the defense this episode against Mariah. But I do think that if you are somebody that just generally enjoys like political books, like political fantasies, this will be like you will like it. I think it's incredibly entertaining. Mariah says it's slow. I don't think it's slow at all. If this is like if you like I don't even know what else. Like I think if you like Priory of the Orange Tree, you would probably like this. I think if you liked I don't even know. Like and I just think it's a really well written fantasy. And if you are like a diehard fantasy, which like Mariah likes fantasy, yes, but you are more of a romance reader. Don't even try to lie or say anything else. You read for the fiction you read is primarily romance.
Yeah, but I'm not like I've read romantasy. I don't generally end up enjoying them as much as like just a full-blown fantasy novel. I
Yes.
don't really like when they mix unless
But
it's
you
a
like
subplot.
just
Like I think
romance. Like you like everything separate in its own like box.
pretty much like unless it's like I think the way that like Lee Bardugo wrote the romances throughout the entire Grishaverse, I think it was really nice, delicately handled. The build was there. It was cute. Like I enjoyed that
And it was
overall.
also
But like I
very
see
subplot. Like the romance is not
yeah,
like in the Shadow and Bone series, Six of Crows and Rule of Wolves, like the romance is not like any of the priorities for any of the characters. They just so happen to like basically happen, you know? Which this
yeah,
like
exactly.
so
Like Lord
like
of the Rings, no romance. It was great. Loved it. Between Two Fires, no romance. Loved it. Fantastic. Give me more. So I
also
was hoping
Mariah's
this was
saying
gonna
this
be
this
kind of like
does not
that.
have romance either, by the way. Just like it's got a romance, but
No,
it's
it doesn't
not.
have any. Yeah, there's no romance. That's besides the point. But so that's not why I don't like this. There is like the way that this story is structured is very much like which I agree with the criticisms. A lot of the people were saying that it is a tell, not show. There's a lot of explaining with like I think it can be under the guise of world building. However, because it's first person, I would have liked to see like Viz experience it, but it felt like it was like telling me things and not showing me. Like I don't know if that makes sense. Like I think the people that get that, but I don't know how
Because,
else
like,
to
the
word it.
thing is that, like, these are just, like the problem is, like, with this is that it's very much, like, opinion versus opinion. It's, like, what we have. Because, like, I think that the way that everything was presented, because it is so complex. I mean, I do have critiques of this because it is first person perspective, which I don't think for any fantasy to any if you're a future fantasy writer, do not write in first person perspective ever. Ever, ever, ever. First person perspective is not meant for fantasy. I will say that. I can see it maybe for
100%.
romantasy at most. If you're focusing more on the romance aspect of your fantasy, then first person can make sense. But objectively, I do not think first person works in a fantasy setting. However, me saying that, this is the best version of a first person point of view in a fantasy book that I've received because it feels much more objective than it is subjective.
Yeah, and I think that's the issue. Is like with a first person perspective, you expect to have more like emotional build or like to see things through their eyes and their experiences. And this does it reads like a third person, and it can be kind of confusing. So it makes for me it made like Viz as a character feel kind of flat. Like was like inept of emotion at time. It wasn't until like way later on that he actually had like some things happened to him, and it was so nice to finally see him. Like I was like, wow, this is finally happening. It feels a lot more like a first person. But that wasn't until like the last like 7 or 25% of the book, and for it being almost like what 650 pages long.
Mine was 700 just about. It was like 600 and something, like almost 700
Yeah,
pages.
but with like the last little, there's a big like appendix and glossary
Yes.
and
Yeah.
stuff. So like when you pull that
Which
out,
is
it
very nice
makes
to
it a lot
have
shorter.
for this
Yes,
book,
we needed
especially.
it for the pronunciations. What else did I want to get through? So that was like the overall structure of the story. The world building was fine. Like, there's nothing wrong, in my opinion, with the world building. I just don't think it was all that fantastical. Like, the only like real like creatures. I wish there was like more creatures. I think that would have been cool. It's
The
just like
Aluppy?
yeah, the Luppy, which is basically just like a wolf.
Yeah.
Um, but that's about it. Like, you don't really get any like birds or anything that makes it feel fantasy.
But again, majority
Aside from, like, the technology, and then the technology is more like sci-fi.
but I think the thing is too is that again with us getting like a bias from Viz's perspective, you're the majority of the book is set on the island that the Academy has moved to at this point in time of the book, right? So like it's very like it's a very small island that only has a school on it. Like it's very much like apparently like within the government, I don't know the entire intricacies of it, but they basically religion there's three branches. There's so much like to discuss with the government because like there's three basic branches of this government. The
If
government
you know
branch.
anything, like, bare bones of, like, a Roman society and the way that there's, like, a senate, it's basically like a copy and paste of that.
Yeah, but like you have like the government branch, you have the religion branch, and then you have the military branch. Those are like the three main branches of the hierarchy, which is like what I guess like their government is called. They which is like the Kantian Republic. Again, this is a very like we're in the spoiler zone, so I'm assuming you've read the book, so you understand like those are the three main branches. And so because of the religion almost like not necessarily having like a monopoly on the education because we don't really know like what the education is outside of the academy because like from my understanding, Viz would have never, like, learned anything else if it wasn't for him getting adopted by Ulkizor? How do you say his name?
I think that's what I put in doc.
Ulkizkor. I don't know. Again, our pronunciations are gonna be probably not the best, but you know what I'm saying? Like, they don't talk about the education, and I feel like there's not enough, like there's not enough like, we don't know a lot still, and that's the thing with like, reading the first book where, like, we would obviously have a more in-depth understanding of the entire, like, understanding of the politics and stuff, which I'm assuming will come in later novels, which, like, obviously they could not, and then, the series would end up falling flat, but as of now, like, we have to look at it objectively for what we know and what Viz knows. Which is a
Yeah,
very, very slim compared to, like, the expansion of what this whole thing is, and I'm assuming we will learn lots more in the future
I sure
as well.
hope so. Because like this book, we get 3 parts, right? You get like the first bit, you get your introduction to Viz, who he is, where he's at, the job he
Mhm.
has to do because he's living in an orphanage, and they have to pay to live in the orphanage, and they also have to like they're supposed to seed their will, which is a very controversial thing in the reviews. Is there's not a real clear understanding of what exactly will is or how the seeding functions. Like it's kind of an ambiguous thing that happens, but because it's not happening to our main character, we don't really get anything. We kind of
Yes.
just see it's very small that we are seeing this happen. I, I don't know if it's happening all the time or if it just happens once.
It happens all the time. Like, it's, like,
It's very but
regular thing.
that's what I mean. A regular
It's
thing, I
this
guess, but again, we're not seeing it very
it
often
says,
in
in the glossary, let me pull it out, because they go to
I
the
looked through my
Aurora
glossary.
Cologne, something like that.
I'm at the
Uh,
hallway.
no, the Aurora Columni Columni? I don't know. It's a pre-cataclysm device which enables people to seed their will, which is like where you go. So it's like there's like a device somewhere that they go to like give up their will to like the next person above them.
Very confusing, though, because I don't
But
think
they talk about that in the
I
book, and I don't think you like read that and
I
comprehended
remember it
that.
being mentioned or like, but there was there any instances of it like physically happening in front of Viz where you can see something happen, or was it just a passing mention of it existing in
Well,
their society?
it happens like the kids that stay at the orphanage, like they talk about they go there like once a month or something to go seed their will, which is why Viz has all the scars on his back because he doesn't seed his will to the matron.
Yes.
He gets beat every time he doesn't do it. Yes.
Yeah, but like that's it. That's like the extent. That's all I remember them talking about was like that one instance. But at the school, nothing. No, that's not happening. They don't do anything at the school because
No.
there's no will usage at the school. So
Yeah, they're
it's
not
very
allowed to use
limited
will.
with our understanding aside from like that, and then like the fight that he has, whatever.
The fight?
Like because he's like he fights for money. Like
Oh,
I don't know. He just does it for money. Like that's.
yes.
But then you like see the effects of like somebody who does have extra will in their system based on this hierarchy. Like you're getting like that world building, the classes, how it affects people,
Yes.
kind of. Um, but then he like up and gets adopted. Like there's a prison. I don't know how to even like structure this. There's a lot that happens in this, and I was a little worried getting into this. I don't know if you want to go exactly plot point by plot point, or if we just want to discuss different things.
I think we can discuss different things, but in like chronological order. Does that make sense?
Okay. Just because we've already been recording for a little bit. Otherwise, this will be like
Yes.
3 hours long because we really haven't gotten like into like
Well,
the
because
Namaki
like,
or anything. Like, how are we
well,
gonna like?
because like that happens in the first part. Well, because basically, like one of the important scenes that I feel like is important to discuss too is like whenever Viz works at the prison, and like he takes Ulsier. I don't know what the fuck is his name.
Isior,
Oh my god, the
you'll
thing.
Isor,
Olkisor. Olkisor.
his adoptive father.
Yes. Basically shows up to the prison that he's working at, and like Viz takes him down like to go, basically he has to like interrogate someone because like they have these machines called the sappers where they're like sucking people's will out forcefully, which I think like very clearly is like a parallel to like at least like the US prison system. I don't really know what the prison system in Australia again is like, so I don't know if it's parallels to that as well, but it's basically like it references it. To me, it basically shows that like the slavery that we have here in the United States throughout our prison system because we are forcing prisoners to do unpaid labor, which like the sappers represent that with people not consenting to their will being given up and they're forced to do it nonstop. Like that's what they do on the sappers. They just sit there and get their will sucked out forever and ever, basically. And like Viz like sees it and like just like internally he discusses about how wrong it is, like no matter like how extreme someone's crime is to him, it doesn't matter. Like nobody deserves the sapper, basically. You know?
Yeah, because he recognizes that it is bad. It's very highly exploitative. He doesn't offer an alternative to a prison system for
He's
the period
also
that
a
they're in.
teenager.
Yes,
And
he's a
he doesn't
teenager,
have
but
the ins and outs of his own perfect government prepared in his mind.
no, but he was being prepared to be a diplomat, so he is significantly more qualified as a narrator since this isn't YA, to actually like make those decisions, in my opinion.
I don't think so. I don't think just because like that's like just saying that like just because someone's the president, like they get the opportunity to be a president, then they know what's best for leading, which we know is objectively not
No, but
true.
like uh, he
That's
like
like
he's like
saying
the main character. Like here, but then
yes, he's
like
the
right, we
main
progress. We
character.
we progress. He's supposed to be like the person that we're watching go through the society, and then he gets adopted. And it's great. It's fine and dandy. He's finally getting back up in the world, by the people that apparently like colonized his place because
Country.
he is nobility. He's a prince in
He
exile.
was
So
nobility,
then,
not anymore. He's not
yeah, yeah.
exiled. They were gonna kill him, and so he has to hide his true identity from the hierarchy because if they knew that he was actually a prince, they would kill him, not exile him.
Which, in my opinion, doesn't really make any sense. But
Why?
whatever. Why would they kill him? I don't know. Why wouldn't they
What do
just
you
be like,
mean? What do you think? Like,
just make him a
whenever.
plebeian? I don't know.
Because, like, look at, like, what happened, like, even, like, obviously, like, this is a, like, in the Russian Revolution, there's a reason why they killed, like, the Romanov children.
We cannot make comparisons to them. Oh
I'm
my
not,
god,
but you
no.
know what I'm saying? Like, you understand, like, the power context of it on why, like, they killed the children of people in power because if not, and you can even see it like later on in the book about like it gives like the people hope to their like budding ideology, you know? Like you can even see it like with Donald Trump and like his children and how like the Trumpies are like, I can't wait for Barron to be president. Like, what are you even talking about? That is a child who is in college who probably doesn't give a shit about any of this. And they're like, oh, yes, the Trump dynasty sort of thing. And you understand, like, why, like,
I guess from like a symbolism perspective, yeah, like sure. We can go with that. But that's what I mean. It's like the politics of this book don't fucking make any sense to me. Because Viz is supposed to be like this oppressed person's, right? Who is like going through it, whatever, goes back up through society, and then he's like almost like not a martyr, but he becomes like a hero at the Namakya because the revolutionaries that show up that he's seen like periodically throughout this commit like an act of terrorism.
yes. Which is intentionally again set up by the Anguis, whatever it is. Um, that was intentionally set up by them for Viz to kill him to like basically like give Viz that like step up so that he can like this is I don't think you can keep viewing like the revolutionary. I feel like the revolutionaries in this are not revolutionaries, they're reactionaries. And I know you believe that as well.
Because like the way the author, like his politics are starting to seep in with the way that he talks about revolutionaries, and it's
But
very
they're not
frustrating throughout this whole thing.
revolutionaries necessarily. Like they can't like they
But
can
they
have
are.
the
That's
right
like how we're supposed
message.
to.
I don't think so. I think they can have like they have a message, but then they also like completely don't even believe in their own message. I'm sure like within certain aspect of it, because you also have to understand there is no Marxism in the Will of the Many. There's no Karl Marx. There's no communism, there's no, like, they don't have those ideologies. So what they are doing is they are implementing, like, the two different, like, what they know and what their knowledge is. Like, from my understanding, none of these countries that were colonized by the Canadian Republic had any type of, like, Marxist things. The closest that they had was, like, Edham's, like, people that were off, like, in the mountains or whatever, and then his own father betrayed his people.
I'm not expecting there to be Marxism, but this is like where the author's politics start to shine through with the depiction of revolutionaries as being terrorists. It's like
I
frustration in the
don't
way that as the story progresses and we see that, oh, the Senate is actually funding them and they wanted this to happen because it re-emboldens them. So it means it
Yes.
seems like Reclusia, right, who is supposed to be like the reasonable, like the true revolutionary, is still a like bloodthirsty, like violence by any means necessary to achieve what she wants for liberation, even though she's also part of the economic, like, ruling class. Like, she was born and raised in it. She was just like, well, it's bad, it's unfair, isn't that enough? And it's so frustrating. Like, the whole angry thing is, like, what's frustrating. And I did read other people's reviews because it wasn't just me, because I was like, there's no way I can be the only one that saw this and found it
But
frustrating.
I think the thing is that because you can see, like, Viz where he doesn't side with either side, and so he has that opportunity to become, like, a true, like, for lack of a better term, within, like, the will of the Manny's vocabulary, to, like, be, like, the Marxist. You know what I'm saying?
But he's not because he keeps appealing to his father, and you can see it in the way that
Because
his
his
father
father's
talks.
going to kill him. Or, like, then his father is also, like, he doesn't sit there, like, whenever his father, I don't think his father is objectively wrong where he critiques the hierarchy, right? Because he talks about, like, the hierarchy is built on greed, which is, like, what America is built off of, yes? And so, like, we have problems within that. And I think because of, like, he's saying that there's no such thing as a good ruler, and, like, objectively within their society, I don't think there's a thing of a good ruler, just like how, like, there is no good ruler in any of our societies here within America, you know? Or in the world, sort of esque, you know? Like, all rulers must do good and they must do bad things for what is the benefit of their people. Without, like, true communism, we will never see that, you know?
But like the whole father's let me read you this review that I found that I think encapsulates what what we're going for. It was by somebody by name P. I don't know who you are, but it's very solid. And they also really liked Babel, so we have that because it's in the review, right? Um, they talk about like the comparison between Red Rising, right, and like where Red Rising start to fall apart. It says, um, this is a
We haven't
series where
read Red
politics are.
Rising, by the way.
I started it just because so many people were saying it was like a one-to-one dupe, and I can see some similarities, just to like get some frame of reference for this episode. So I kind of have an idea of like what's happening world building. Like it's very similar. Um, but it said this is a series where politics are central to the story. There is an ideology and an understanding that class struggle is inextricable from a rigidly stratified society. The will of the many sometimes pretends to understand this, but largely does not appear to care for it. Viz feels quite self-serving in his motivations, where present, and I found it bizarre how often the novel slipped into a reflection on the better times under his father's rule. It does not really bother to consider that maybe Viz was free because he was in a position of power. It doesn't really bother to consider how his experiences under the hierarchy among the lowest strata of society could have challenged his views. If anything, there is a concerning impression that Viz looks down upon those of the same people. And I think this is relevant with the way he even views just like the ideas of Angui. Like he's just like, no, they're all bad. And like my father also said this thing. Like he's constantly like falling back on them being like violent based on his own opinions. And I think it's so frustrating the way that this is pictured because it reminds me a lot of Hunger Games and the way that District 13 get painted as being like, oh, in the very end, they were going to be just as bad and they're violent and they cause all of this. So it's like a George Orwellian, like Animal Farm type beat. And it drives me
But
crazy. And I've
that's
been
the
sitting on this
The
I'm
thing
thinking about it.
is that, like, you're saying this of this opinion without the series being finished. Again, like, if that ends up happening, I will eat my words and I will not enjoy the series. Yes. I will probably end up like I do not think Mockingjay or whatever is it Mockingjay is as good as
Yeah.
the Hunger Game. But Mockingjay's finale does not diminish the good that is the Hunger Games and Catching Fire.
But the good is not present in this because there is evidence of this throughout the
I
entire
think there's
story.
still good within this because there is still so much for our character to learn, and he is learning. He is like
But
he
you're
has
basing
the
it on a
basis down.
possibility in this but and you're basing it on a possibility.
You are also
But
basing it
I'm
on a
basing it on what is
possibility,
happening.
but that's
No, no,
with
no, I'm basing it on what was in the book. I have all of the lines. I have, like, 15
but
different
the thing
lines of the
is
way
that
that Angry
these
has
are
been
still
described.
again, the character has not been through, like, the growth that is needed. We have barely seen any type of anything going on. We still don't know, like, the intricacies of the government or anything like that. We don't know. So basing this on, like, this is what it's gonna end up being, we don't know that. We can't, like,
But
we
I'm
have
not
not
basing it
seen.
on what it's gonna end up being. Like, that is a fear of mine, but what is present in the book right now
Yes,
is what
because
I'm basing
Viz
this
is
off of.
obviously going to have a biased perspective because he grew up in wealth. No?
I don't think we're on the same page.
Well, because, like, the thing is that you
You're
ask.
telling me he spent 3 years, though, as, like, an orphan and, like, still, the only sort of, like, reflection or any sort of, like, thing that, like, isn't self-ser he's, like, learning from other, like, bourgeois people, like, of the like, Caladidius or whatever, like, his best friend is the only reasonable individual, and again, he's still, like, a bureaucrat's son. But, like, you're
Yes.
telling like, the orphanage and everything he grew up for, and, like, oh, he goes back to that island, and he's still even though he has the understanding, he doesn't actually have any sort of, like, interest as a character that isn't outside of his own, like, self-preservation until his best friend dies,
Well,
and I think that's
that's
absolutely
literally
insane.
because of what is, like, the struggles that he is dealing with this book. He is literally told by his adoptive father, "Hey, you're gonna be fucking killed and sent to a sapper if you don't fucking find information about my brother killing himself because I know my brother didn't kill himself." And so, of course, Viz is acting in his own self interest because he's going to freaking suffer and get sucked up for because he was in the wrong place to get adopted by like this rich guy or whatever.
But even when he's in school and he's doing all of the stuff, like,
He
in the
has his
classes, right,
own
it's like a breeze.
priorities.
He's a breeze. He's just like, "Well, I would have fired my tutor if she would have done this." And, like, every woman in this book that he ends up running into is, like, treated with disdain because they're like a bitch, like, they're awful, every woman, like, so, like, I am seeing,
I
like, the
don't even think.
author's own biases pull through and the way that, like, there's no way, there could have been so much better of a way to depict this, and, like, him I'm already, like, turned off by him being, like, an old, like, I don't know what you wanna call it, part of the aristocracy or whatever that is in this society, but I've never cared, like, throughout the whole thing because he's so, like there's nothing to him until, like, towards the end where he actually has some sort of, like, emotions. Like, the last 50 pages of this book are the only reason I will continue it because 'cause I'm like, "Okay, there's something going on," but mainly because I'm trying to stay on top with, like, my Marxist understanding to see if where this author is going to take it.
Because the thing is too, is that your critique of like all of the women characters are bitches or whatever. In my opinion, every single fucking character is a bitch to Viz. Like literally at the beginning. It doesn't matter if they're a man or a woman. In my opinion. Every single one of them has a fucking attitude with him because they hate him because he's poor.
Like, don't you think it's weird that, like, they acknowledge that, like, there's, oh, like, some sort of, like, oppression with, like, women, but then they kind of abandon it. Like, there's no, like, interconnecting understanding of, like, the racism with Etem and, like,
This is
his, like,
again
people in the
only the
mountains.
first book.
But Babel was able to accomplish so
But
much more
Babel was
with
also
less.
doing something different. That's the thing is that you can't compare the like it's Babel-esque in like the political intrigue, yes, but these are completely different like stories and different like things, you know? Like there's so much more going on with this where we even have the whole like ending about like Carrier or whatever the fuck his name is, Ulkiser's brother or whatever actually being alive in like
His
some
name's like
other.
Caesar or something, right? I always think it's Caesar.
No,
It
it's
would be funny if he was
Carrier.
like
It's like
right? It
Carrier.
said like
I wrote it down somewhere. Hold on. Um, Carrier, Caeror, Carrier. That's how I'm saying it.
Carrier.
Carrier. And there's so much more, like, so much more complex where, like, yes, you can have these critiques of it, but again, I feel like they're bias in your own mindset where we don't know what's going on. We don't know the intricacies of the government because we basically only got like Biz going to this school and like because like even with like the Principalis Viridius or whatever, like we get nothing of him. We're just told by Ulcer that he's a dick, pretty much, and that like he's doing something underneath like the military's noses and the religion like is trying to do something like more extreme that we don't know about, you know? And so we also have like the infighting of this own government with like military wanting to have more power again because now that the entire world has been colonized, they have nothing to do virtually. They people are viewing the military as a pointless branch of their government. And of course, this class of the military leaders are going to be like, no, we have to stay relevant because we want to keep getting their will being ceded to us. And so while they're doing that, is they're funding like the Anguis to like be like, see, like, oh look, guys, there's still bad people in the world, even though we took it over. We there's still bad people, so that means we gotta like stay in power and be strong, like basically like solidifying like their police state.
It just is not intriguing to me though. Like
Well,
that
that's
aspect.
like
I
your
think it's
personal
just like
opinion.
yes, like but it doesn't feel like articulated right. Like somebody did say like it felt like I said, like they're just equally bad. Like the whole time they're viewed as being equally bad. He doesn't ever like view them as having like potential. Like this one, it feels like because like even Reclusia, who's supposed to be like the true revolutionary, like
But
ends up
is
going
she
on to
supposed to
say
be a
that
true revolutionary? She's bourgeois, we know this.
that's I mean that's all we have to go off of is she's like the only one throughout this story that is painted to actually care and actually kind of like stand up in her own ways against some of the stuff that's happening because we don't know like the decision making within Angui. That's why I think she gave Viz the knife, right? So she could kill or he could kill Melior or whatever.
Yeah.
Um but then also she's like, I
But I
want
think
you to
that was
get in there and
intentionally
destruct
planned.
it from the inside. Like you're gonna be in government and then you're gonna destruct it from the inside. And it gives very liberal.
I
So it's
don't think
like I
she's
don't
even trying to
understand.
be, like, destructing from the
That's
inside,
what
like
she said.
but it's not like that's why I'm saying, like, I don't think Reluxia or whatever her name is, like, the true, like, revolutionary, you know what I'm saying? You're saying that, like,
But
she's
this is all
supposed
we've
to
been
be.
given. So it's like, is there like another
But the
faction?
thing
I'm
is
not
that
basing that on a hypothetical. I'm basing this as just what there is. This is all
there's
the book has to offer
more
me right now.
there's more going on, and that's the thing is that you're sitting here like, "Oh, like, blah, blah, blah," like, about, like yes, this is all the book has, but we know this is supposed to be, like, a multi-book series, you know? And so, like, we can't like, if this was just a standalone, then yes, we could have these critiques of it, and I wouldn't like it as much, but I know that there's going to be more because there has to be more because they're planning on more of a series, and so there's something else that's, like, going to be, like, a bigger villain or a bigger something because you can see that with, like, Carrier and, like, uh, Viridius and, like, whatever they're doing in the religion aspect thing.
I don't care about any of that. I care about like what's on the page that you would read. So it's like, how can I
What do you
convince other people who are left wing revolutionaries to read a book where revolutionaries are treated like terrorists?
But
Like,
I
how can
don't think
I?
necessarily but because, like, the thing is that, like, these revolutionary there are some revolutionaries that are reactionary that are not, like, for our cause, like, we know this, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, like who?
What do you mean, like, who? Like, there are, like you don't think that there's people that like, there's, like, the people that were doing January 6th. Those would be like, the liberals and stuff would classify them as revolutionaries because they were storming the Capitol, but we know that they're just reactionaries that are not actually, like, fighting for the betterment of society.
Yeah, but in this, that's not what's happening.
What do you mean that's not what's happening? Do you
Like you
think
can see it in Melior's like speech, right?
that's Melior,
And
the
the way that
leader, but then
Reclusia is talking about it and how I can pull up her like quote directly of like what she ended up saying. Where did it go?
because I think the idea is that the Anguis is much more complex than just, like, good bad, you know what I'm saying? And that's, like, the thing, like, the intricacies of it, because, like, there can be good people within the Anguis, but then there's also, like, the bad people that are like, "Oh, like, we're working for the military because we want to work for the military," sort of thing, you know?
But Reclusia, right? This is supposed to be like the person that, because we learn about like the federal agents that are involved at the very end. But Reclusia says, "You think an Octavius who's given his will is somehow less responsible than the sexist who's killing with it. The weak and the poor endure the hierarchy because the alternatives are harder, not because there are none. They know that the system is wrong, but they choose not to think or speak up or act because they ultimately hope that it is that in their silence they will gain, or they will at least not have to give more than they have already given. They are driven by a myopic self-interest and greed just as much as the senators and knights, and it is, as Mellor said, you of all people should hate them for that." And then she goes on to keep saying that, like, oh, like, silence is violence, right? Like, she's supposed to be the revolutionary.
Yes, and
Like,
I
that
do
is what
think
is present.
I think she's right in a lot of ways too, like, with what she says and stuff like that, because, like, in reality, like, again, it's, like, the idea of, like, these people that are like, "Oh, like, I'm not gonna boycott because boycotting does nothing," or, "I'm not gonna blah, blah, blah because blah, blah, blah," and then, like, they're so comfortable with living in the imperial core, which is basically what happens in, like, this society, is that these people are too comfortable. And again, like, I think, like, what they're used for is to make them uncomfortable because they can't keep living like this, because or else they're going to keep suffering and losing just like the working classes. But you're telling me that, like, we are like, the problem is that, like, within us, like, we know, like, about, like, the radicalization and stuff like that. But you know this, like, when we talk to liberals and we talk to conservatives and stuff like that, and whenever they are so ingrained within their capitalist mind that they are bootlicking and helping the working class and stuff like that, where we're like, "Oh, they're going to need to go to the gulag," sort of thing, you know?
Yeah, but, like, when you see this in a fantasy novel, right, these are supposed to be the opposition, right, to the power. There's always, like, an opposition to the power, and Babel did it really effectively. I liked how there was still inner, conflict, whether it was reform or revolution. Like, there was still, like, intricacies, and you got to see this through, like, Robin's perspective, and it was really nice, it was delicate. Even though I don't necessarily agree with, like, the conclusions that ended up happening, at least you had, like, some, like, there was an explanation to
But
it.
that's the thing,
This
but we
feels
don't have the
like
explanation of the Anguis. We don't know their inner workings. We are not within it. Like, we only know, like, 2 characters that are within it, you know?
I don't I that I w that's I can like, can't in, like, good faith recommend this to anyone just because of the way that, like, the revolutionaries are depicted as, like, material accelerationists in this, and although, like, their plight is valid, they are still demeaned, and then, like, Viz, because he's the main character, the one you're supposed to be rooting for throughout the whole thing, um, is kind of, like, sitting, like, I don't know, it gives very literal, like, if he goes into power, into Senate, he can, like, reorganize society to benefit everyone, and I don't know. I don't know, it sat very uncomfortably with me, I didn't like it, and, looking through the reviews of the people that did finish it and rated it a lower, like, 2, 3, 1 star, they had very similar complaints. Not the ones that are, like, liberal, and they're like, "I think this, ceding the will equals taxation." I was like, "You're fucking dumb. That's not what that
Yeah.
equals."
Yeah.
Unless that's what they really wanted it to equal, but it doesn't make any sense because it's about, like, surplus labor value, like, your
Yes.
mental, emotional, physical labor, like, it's
Yeah.
very on point. That's why it's confusing because, like, it's so in your face. Like, if you have read theory or and just understand, like, how your labor creates wealth for the economic ruling class, like, there's some parts of this that are just, like, so on point, and the other parts that just fall so bad, and, like, I hold out hope for the best. I really do. But I'm not all that optimistic that it's going to go the way I want it to. I feel like it's kind of to be like, we need to work together to, like, get this done. Look, there's more to life than just exploiting each other or something silly. Like, just
Well, I mean, because the
I
thing
don't
is that,
know.
like, they do
Those
need
are just
to.
my opinions at the very end. Like, just like my speculation and like my worries, not based on what's in the book. That's just like me being me. The rest, though,
I
yeah,
mean, yes, but I think, like, again, we're getting Viz's first person perspective. He's biased. Of course he is. You know what I'm saying? He's a teenager that is more worried about him not getting sent to the sapper than he is worried about anybody else in the story, you know? And he's like, I haven't had my will seated. And you can see his change of heart at the end because he was like, I could easily just go on and be like, whatever he called it in this other country. Like, you know what I'm talking about? Whatever he was like, had
yeah.
the
Where
option of
he
doing.
wanted to like go away and kind of like hide forever, but now he's like, I'm gonna go on the inside.
Well, because, like, the thing is that, like, within their government and stuff like that, like, we don't know the complexities of it too, where it's, like, even, like because there is, like, this whole, like, extra, like, set of, like, pre-cataclysm, like, whole, like, thing going on where there's some type of, like, technology like, because, like, there's this thing that, like, we don't really know too much about, that there was, like, this cataclysm or whatever that basically implemented giving the hierarchy the power that they have now, where they were able to, like, see people's will and stuff like that. So something had to have happened before that we don't know about, like, historically, to even understand, like, what is going on within that. And I think, like, with Viz going into the Senate, we're going to get, like, that historical context for it
Which that was,
too.
like, one of the coolest things, and I think that was, like, the only saving grace for me personally that it had was, like, this kind of mysticism where it does get a little bit more fantastical. It reminded me a lot of the, anime Solo Leveling, where it's like a dungeon crawler. He goes if you haven't seen it, they're all, like, different levels based on the magic that they have in this world. They go into these dungeons, and they end up actually going into this extra strong one, and he gets sacrificed on this altar, and then he gets imbued with all of this power, right? And it's like he turns into like this video game where he can like do extra stuff in his society. It's really cool. Or like Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, like where he makes the equal exchange, right? They're trying to bring back their mother. The brother is like imbued into the armor, and then he loses his arm, and like they have all this power that gets like thrust upon them. So it was like really cool to see that like there's extra like also like almost like alchemy. It makes the will seem, or like whatever the religious power in the will of many is. It just added a nice layer to it, and I thought that was really lovely. I just wish it would have been like more at the forefront because it was kind of like slow. They could have had more religious elements.
But I think, like, at least moving on, like, into the second book, I have high hopes for it because, again, like, I do see like, this could go in a really shitty direction and it could fall apart just, like, kind of like how The Hunger Games does, where the last book is not nearly as good as the rest because they end up just being like, "Oh, like, let's put the cop in power," sort of thing, where this obviously can do that, but I think as of now, like, saying, like, "Oh, that's what this is going to turn into," is not true whenever we just have a biased perspective where yes we're getting Viz's biased perspective because he is biased. And I think whenever he goes like to work for the census, I'm hoping that he's going to learn all of this stuff, you know, because like he again is not really much around, like even whenever he was around like the people in the orphanage, none of the kids at the orphanage liked him.
No, not at all.
And so, of course, he's gonna be, like, biased against them because he has no, like, solidarity within them, you know? And so, like, he's like, "Well, like, I don't think, like, what they're doing, like, them ceding their will is, like, right to do, but they're choosing to do it, so that's their business." And it's, again, like, Viz has such an individualistic idea, and he still does until the end of the book whenever Callidius dies, and then he realizes, like, there is so much more to this than what I've ever realized, you know? And I think
That was
that's
so nice. I had
yeah,
those
and so
highlight, like him crying or doing things. I was like, oh my god, he's actually like has something to his character that is actually intriguing.
well, that's the thing, and I think,
That
like
was so nice. I just wish we could have seen more inkling. Like that could have been sprinkled a little bit because it's a first person perspective. It would have been nice to see like more emotional turmoil with him.
I
But I
think
just didn't
there
feel like I got enough of that.
I don't know, because I feel like I do see it within that, but I think it's like it is a very like long growth period. Like nobody wakes up and they're radicalized. You know what I'm saying? Like it's learning, it's being around other people, it's building community, it's all of this. And with Viz, he didn't get that until the end where you can see him build his community with Aquia or whatever her name is, sorry, and Edham and Calidus, like they're all like they slowly like form like this bond, and I think like they can use that to continue to grow. And like eventually I'm sure they will probably, I'm hoping anyways, that there would be some type of like actual revolution, but they can't just form it without like having like a group to do that, you know.
Yeah, I would like to see them do it um with like I would like to see more common people. Like cuz we don't really get a whole lot of that in this. And I think that was also frustrating because I understand it's dark academia and they're like cut off from society, but like or at least have more people in like the one that like actually succeeds in the meritocracy that isn't Viz. You know what I mean? Cuz he's supposed to be like that stand-in. That's why he's like the um the golden boy of society. Like he does all of these. He's a hero he's supposed to
Yeah.
be like this intern, but he's not actually.
Yes,
Like,
but
he
they don't
was
know that.
a prince, but I know they don't know that, but, like, me seeing I'd like to see, like, the ideals of the people on the ground
And I
more.
think
It
we
would be
have
nice
that
just to see
opportunity
common
because
folk.
we're learning he's going like because like we have those great lines from Callidius who has been looking at his father's like research and the census stuff, and that's like inherently what has radicalized um Calidus, you know what I'm saying? Like he's gotten that where he sees like what has been done to these people with them forcing to be seen in their will, and about how like there really is no like growth within society. It's like you're basically only powerful in society if you're born into this. And I think Biz learns that like very much from Calidus. And you can see that like towards the end whenever he's like, you know what? Like I could be that person that goes off on my own and never having to cede my will and I don't have to suffer. But then he learns that like, hey, what that's not right. I need to figure out what's going on and do the right thing. Which I think is like almost as if he's like getting that inkling of caste consciousness, which is like this whole book it was more I think like focusing on like the world building and like you realizing that like hey, there's like so much more at play here than just like an orphan boy going to school and learning, you know? I
Yeah.
think too, especially because like again, like Mariah was saying like this is someone who really enjoys fantasy. I think yes, but I think it's also like almost like as beginner into high fantasy that you can get. Almost. Because like it's like
I mean, I don't know if
complex.
I would recommend it to a beginner because, like, if you especially because there is, like, an added layer of, like, language that they wanted to like, the author threw into it, so I think that can be kind of confusing. Like, I think you're better to start off with, like, something like The Magician's Daughter or something if you don't
Well,
really
I meant like
understand
for high
fantasy.
fantasy, high fan like if you're
Oh,
going
like,
into high
world
fantasy, yeah.
building.
If you're
Don't
like
read, like, Dune or
no.
anything because like, Dune's a lot.
I think like if you're looking for to get into high fantasy, I think this is like the best start. At least as of now for high fantasy. Besides like maybe like Mistborn or something like that because it's so in depth and like that's the thing with high fantasy is that there's so much going on is that you have to think about everything from every angle. You know, like it's
Yeah,
like
and, like, you can like, I highlighted I did my if you don't know, if you have a Kindle, I don't know how it works on Kobo or anything else, but you can export your highlights and your notes if you I use my phone with my Kindle app, it syncs to my, regular Kindle, so you can highlight all this stuff. I had, like, 22 pages, and I ended up having to, like, change the font, change everything down. It was, like, a ton of maybe it ended up being a little bit less than that after, like, I formatted it better. It was a ton of stuff, like, so I would hope that people would do this in a book club because it's such a popular book. It's a new release, new-ish release.
mhm.
If you go on Fable, I'm sure there is the Wool of Many book club. So in 2025, you should do that because I don't think you should read it alone. I think you should read it with a friend.
It is very complex and I think it was very hard too because like I think me and Mariah ended up talking about this before the podcast a lot more than we typically do for other books because Mariah was very confused at the beginning as well with believing that it was like I think
Oh,
you went like the
brother.
first 200 pages thinking that it was like a Roman fantasy and I was like, "Well, it's not
Yeah,
Rome
because I'm like, oh,
exactly."
it's year like what 220,
I don't
217,
remember
and
them
they're like,
ever
oh, you got your
recalling a year.
staples. You got your staples removed, and I was like, "Oh, actually, staples weren't invented until 1908." So it was just stuff like that. Plus, I was also like trying to go through and work through some of Michael Parenti's *The Assassination of Julius Caesar* to like see like a people's history of the Roman Empire and like trying to get an idea of like the politics of it. And it's interesting. I would like to see more of like actual like Roman politics, but it's kind of just it is Roman inspired, but there
It
is
is not
technology
Rome.
and stuff. Yeah, it's not Rome. It's not
It's not
Rome. They
Rome.
do wear like
Togas,
togas and sandals, but then they also have like flying
flying
columns,
spaceships.
marble. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very there is some sort of tech. It's very interesting in that aspect. I just wanted a little bit more and the politics make me a little wary right now. And I will eat my words if it changes. I absolutely will because I hope I'm wrong
Well,
about my
because, like,
analysis. But
I
just
think
given everything
especially
I've read,
with
it
the
just
ending because with the ending, if this ends up going down, like, the Calidus path, that is promising, in my opinion, because we see how Calidus is, and he's like the most like he's like the smartest guy in like this whole book. And like even Viz talks about like how like Calidus should be like basically the highest level. He is so smart, you know? And so I think it's there. I think
But
I can see
I don't
I can see it.
I've been sitting for a minute. I don't I don't really have any other thoughts, and I hope people will understand. Like, maybe I can publish my lines and my quotes on Goodreads or do a Substack to like substantiate exactly where this is coming from. If people are interested, please do not berate us in the comment section or me. Kristen absolutely
You can
loved
berate
this.
Mariah. I don't
You
care.
can bully me all you want. I will die on this hill. But I don't think it's completely unfounded. Some of the stuff I was saying, if you've read through it, I have the highlighted notes. Like, there is sus
I
stuff.
think there is valid critiques, but again, it's like that does not, for me personally, that did not harm my enjoyment of this. I still am very interested in the politics no matter which way it goes, because like I want to know which way it goes and stuff like that. Where I think like if it does end up like being like what I want, if like a communist revolution, then I would be like, "Oh yes, like I never doubted you." But then also if it doesn't, then it's like it's very disappointing that like liberals ruin everything. But like,
Yeah,
I do think,
anything
like,
is
the
possible.
sauce is there, like, it's cooking. I think there's a lot cooking, and it's very complex, and I do think that, like, there are obviously, like, critiques that you could have, like, it's not, like, going to be, like, a perfect Marxist book, but I think if you're always looking for, like, a perfect Marxist book, it'll never it won't be there because, like
I'm hoping by the time we get to the second one, we have it on the books at some point to read Mistborn, because the next book isn't going to come out for a while.
not till
Like,
May, I
what,
think.
May?
May.
So we might be able to get through Mistborn trilogy. I'm gonna read. I don't think we're gonna review it for the podcast, but the Red Rising, just to have that framework, because people are saying it is like a 1-to-1, and then maybe Kristen can dabble in the original source material that inspired it, because it kind of sounds like something that's up your alley, or maybe Earthsea by Ursula Le Guin.
What was it called? Name of the Wind or whatever? I'll add it
I
to
think
my
so.
TBR. Because, like, and the thing is too, is like I love this book, and I just want to let anybody know I am planning a reread before the second book comes out as well.
Maybe you can
Because
do a book club.
I think a lot of it could be definitely recontextualized as well. What did you say it was called? Name of the Wind?
I think so.
Oh, I think I've seen this before actually. Oh my god, it's
Very popular though. It has
662
a.
pages. A million
It's your kind
reviews?
of. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think it's like a. It must be like an Australian, fantasy author, because I've never heard of them until I was reading through like his inspiration of like where he got the ideas. He also has another series that Kristen was interested in reading,
Oh,
possibly.
actually, I have seen it. I did. I literally just looked up this guy the other day. I don't remember why though. I think there was a maybe it was this book I was looking at. Maybe I don't know. He has some work that's in like German, so I don't know who this guy is. But sorry, a little off topic. But yes,
You're okay. Thank you for listening. I'm not sure what's going to end up coming out next. It might be Flock. It might be. I think it's going to be a TikTok dark romance
it's
or
either Flock or Lights Out.
taboo romance to finish off the year. Um, because that's what's popular right now, and we also kind of don't know what to read. So we got to figure out our January schedule. Keep an eye out. We're going to work on figuring out the book club. I think that's going to happen for sure. I'll at least make sure it
Yes,
happens with one of the. I think either it's going to be a book that we're reading for the podcast, or maybe a book that we're not reading for the podcast, and we could just like do a group chat or something for it. I don't know. Something. If anyone wants to read along with us, that we need ideas. So if anyone has any comments for it, we're open to anything.
yes.
We're just two fun little goofy guys that like reading books and like Karl Marx and Engels.
Yeah.
Yep.
Um. Anyways, if that's all we have to say, either read Flock or Lights Out. Maybe read them both if you're into that. I I don't have anything to say. I'm reading Flock right now, and I want to DNF it, but Mariah won't let me. So depending on how that
Nope.
ends, we'll do the Ravenhood trilogy. Is that what it's called? Or
Yes, by
whatever.
Kate Stewart.
If I finish Flock and I am intrigued enough to read the other 2 books in the series. If not, we'll probably just pivot to Lights Out because at least that's only 1 book. But other than that, Mariah's frozen, so thank you and good night.
Hello.